afternoon, and welcome to our Azra's book reading and signing and talk about her latest book, First Cell. It's very nice to see so many wonderful people over here, and welcome to you all for a very exciting, exhilarating, informative talk today. And I think just the fact that you turned out in so many numbers, it really validates and affirms our thought process and efforts in setting up this South Asia Institute. As you know, South Asia Institute has been open only about 3 months, and it was conceived about 4 or 5 years ago, thinking that, you know, whenever we talk to somebody, we always see that somebody else is telling our story and our narrative. That means South Asian narrative. And I think it's the right time that we should take ownership of our narrative and our story, and we should tell that story. And I think that was the reason why we endeavored to start this South Asia Institute. And not only that we want to tell our narrative, but we want to tell our narrative to our people and other people who is willing to listen. And we have a rich culture, and we have rich art, and I think everybody should be proud of our South Asian heritage. And I think a lot of people tend to be getting away from that, and a lot of hunger out there for what South Asians are all about and what our culture is all about. And today's event is in part of a project that we try to exemplify or put forward the heroes of South Asian society. And this is one of those first events that we are doing. And as you know, May is South Asian History Month. And we are going to be showcasing an important either past or present South Asian in this US society starting from May on our website. And in that process also, to make it much more elaborate and much more interesting, we are going to be looking for an executive director, and we've been doing interviews, and we have looked at one individual that we are going to be hiring and bringing him on board. So that he's be a full-time. And a lot of people know of him, maybe, but I think he's a known entity, and right now he's out of town, and he's going to be coming on board starting next month. So hopefully, you know, things will pick up, and you'll see more and more of South Asia Institute. And I just want to, before I give the mic over to Shireen, I just wanted to go over a little bit about what we are doing in the near future. And like I told you that we are going to be celebrating the South Asian Heritage Month, May of 2020, and you'll be starting to see some of the icons in South Asian history in the United States being featured in our website. Also, we had an opening about 3 months ago, and we invited some friends, but we are going to be doing an inaugural gala on March the 14th, and it's an event that is going to feature Zishan, and I'm sure a lot of people in the community know about Zishan Bhagawati. Zishan is a very interesting young man. He graduated from Northwestern University, and he majored in Italian opera. And he's an operatic singer, and over the period of time he has morphed into some combination of South Asian, operatic, and mainline American music and video. And as you know, he was recently made an appearance at Colbert Show also. So he's got a new video out called Brown Power. And it's based on similar things as like the Black Power. But Black Power, as you know, started with a fist hand, but his motto is togetherness. So I think it's going to be a very interesting feature for the gala, and you'll be able to listen to him live, and everybody who has listened to him would appreciate what kind of a talent and what kind of a voice this young man has. And you can go on our website and buy the tickets for that, and we're looking for sponsorship, and I think we'll appreciate everybody who can sponsor the event, and that will bring in a lot of recognition to them because they're going to be featured in our program bill and on the displays. And also in the month of April 5th, we are going to be doing tribute to the music of Lal Gudi Jayaraman and Ravi Shankar also. And there is a group that is going to be traveling through the United States, and they're going to be performing in this building, and South Asian Institute has teamed up with them to bring this group to the United States. And with that, I would like to turn the mic over to my wife, who is going to be conducting, who's going to be emceeing the event with Azra Raza. And it's a very interesting event in the sense that all the cast of characters are South Asians, all are women. I guess what do you expect in this Me Too generation? All are immigrants, all are university professors, and all have extensive research background. With that, I'll ask Shireen to come up.
Thanks, Afzal. Welcome and good afternoon to all of you. That was very nice, what Afzal had to say about the three of us, but I think I do have to recognize Afzal's part in this whole project. We couldn't do this without him. And for those of you that know Afzal, when he takes something on, it's going to happen. So it's really a pleasure to have with us today Dr. Azra Raza. Azra is a dear friend to not only us, but also to so many of you in the audience. And I'm just so glad that we were able to bring her back to Chicago. We really miss her. So a little bit about Azra for those of you who don't know about her. She's the Chansun Shiong, did I say it right? Professor of medicine and the director of the myelodysplastic syndrome center at Columbia University in New York. And before that, she was the chief of hematology oncology at the Gladys Smith and the Gladys Smith Martin Professor of Oncology at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And before that, for all of you who know Azra so well, she was here for many, many years at Rush University, and I can't understand why you left us. I think I do, but. So she's considered an international authority on myelodysplastic disease and acute leukemia. And she's one of those unusual physicians who divides her time both with clinical practice, taking care of patients, and also supervising a really well-funded, fully funded basic research lab. And she had the foresight many years ago, back in the 80s, in 1984, when she started collecting samples of blood and bone marrow from her patients. And she now has the largest and oldest tissue bank in the US. She has over 60,000 samples of these patients. That's a wonderful resource. Azra's published over 300 peer-reviewed manuscripts in some really high-profile journals, things like Nature and the New England Journal of Medicine, and I know this is probably only means something to those of us who are physicians in the audience, but things like Cell and Molecular Cell and Cancer Research and Blood and Leukemia, all these are really the top journals in oncology. She's published over 1,000 abstracts and dozens of book chapters, and she's edited a book that's actually devoted to myelodysplastic disease. And then she still finds time to co-edit a website with her brother. Those of you who read this every day, there's some, I don't know how he collects all the information that he has on there, but it's called 3 Quarks Daily, and do check it out. She's the recipient of numerous awards, including the Hope Award for Cancer Research. And I have still more to say about Azra. So, she's also been an advisor to presidents and vice presidents. She works with Bill Clinton's Science and Technology Collaborative, and she's also been an advisor to Vice President Biden with his Cancer Moonshot Initiative. All of you are here today because we want to celebrate her publication of her book, The First Cell. She's going to talk with her friend and colleague and fellow oncologist, Seema Singhal. But not many of you know that when it comes to cancer, Azra really has first-hand knowledge of what it takes to reconcile the science and reality. Her late husband, Harvey Pressler, who was director of the Cancer Center here at Rush until he succumbed to the disease. And I don't want to divulge a lot about the book. It's a must-read. But I also want to point out to those of you who do not know this about Azra, she's also very well versed both in English and Urdu literature. And she has walls of books in her home, in her apartment in New York City. She's also the co-author of Ghalib, Epistemologies of Elegance. And when she lived here in Chicago, she regularly hosted some of the most entertaining salons in her apartment. And we miss those sessions, Azra. And once you're done with all your book tours, I hope that we'll be able to get you back here for an evening of Ghalib. So without much ado, I think we're going to invite Azra and Seema up here. And while they're getting up here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Seema. So Seema Singhal is the Shays Family Professor of Myeloma Research. And she's a professor of medicine in the Division of Hematology Oncology at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, right here in Chicago. She's also a member of the Robert Lurie Comprehensive Cancer Center and directs the multiple myeloma program. She graduated from Bombay University Seth G.S. Medical College with honors and completed her internship and residency in internal medicine at the King Edward VII Memorial Hospital and the Bombay Hospital Institute for Medical Sciences in Mumbai, in India. After that, Seema went on to do her residency in bone marrow transplantation at the Hadassah University Hospital in Jerusalem. And there she worked on hematologic malignancies and bone marrow transplantation. We continued that work at the Royal Marsden Hospital in London. And then that led to numerous publications in some very prestigious journals. She then came to the US, and her first faculty position was at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences in Little Rock. And that institute has one of the largest myeloma programs in the world. At Northwestern, she's involved with studies involving new drugs for myeloma, and her work there has resulted in 2 US patents. And she continues to work on new approaches in treating myeloma and related diseases, with a special emphasis on minimal residual immunotherapy and novel drugs. Thank you, Seema.
Thank you. So, I've read this book cover to cover, and it's poetry, philosophy, and medicine woven together in a unique style that is all Azra, poet, philosopher, and physician. And I felt I got to know you all over again as I read it. I really enjoyed the book. Azra, your warmth, your love for others, your knowledge, not just science, but poetry, literature. Shireen wasn't joking when she talked about the books, and the books are all in her head. You don't really need that library. And her passion, it just shines through the pages as one charts, you've charted the story of your experience with cancer through both the physician and the patient's perspective, and you've revealed how this shaped your thought processes, leading to this conviction that there is an urgent need to catch and attack cancer at the very beginning before it consumes everything. The book is a biography of sorts. You talk about specific people and their personal harrowing experiences with cancer, including Harvey's, whom we all knew, and we all were part of that, a very small part of that process, that experience, and then individuals that you have personally known, taken care of. And in that, I would say about 70% of the book is the narrative story of these people. And it really takes you in to experience cancer the way even I as a physician can forget when you're in clinic and you're just dealing with the science of it, and you just see a glimpse of the patient and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You know, but you kind of don't think about it. And then when you read this book, you realize, gosh, it really does consume everything. So I would say about 70% of the book is the biography, and 30% is science. And it just keeps coming in, as the thoughts develop. And when I look at the title, it's the first cell. So clearly, Azra, the message and the focus that you want to give is about the science and the first cell and the need to do something about it. So I'm going to let you tell us why you wrote the book, what's the message, what are you trying to say?
Thank you so much, Seema. I could not have asked for a better interlocutor than you, because not only do we share a professional interest, but we also have so many personal memories and such a deep friendship going over 2 decades. Our children growing up together, doing sleepovers since they were little in each other's homes. But especially very poignant for me to be in Chicago, surrounded by so many friends and people I love. My cousins are here, my friends from as far away as Bhavalpur. Shalale is here from Pakistan visiting. And of course, Shireen and Afzal, what a wonderful place you have created. I also want dishonor, and what a glowing introduction you gave. I want Shireen to introduce me from now on everywhere I go. It was really beautiful. Thank you. I think being here in Chicago is again emotionally charged for me because I went through some deep experiences here. And when Seema asked me why I wrote the book, I think I wrote the book to try and clarify a lot of confusions. It's true that anyone who is not confused has not been paying attention. Because everything looks simple as long as you leave out the details. I recently read a great Steinbeck book called it's a collection of short stories. He wrote it when he was 29 and it was posthumously published. And Steinbeck is standing on top of a mountain and looks down into the Valley of California, and it is so gorgeous that he exclaims, "These are the pastures of heaven." So the book is called The Pastures of Heaven, but it is about 12 or 13 interconnected short stories, because the next thing he does is he takes you into 12 homes in that valley. And you enter each home and you realize the lonely obsessions, the insanities, the craziness that can exist in human relationships. The kind of lives people are leading, so full of complexities. And that's the problem, that life is obviously, like love, extremely complex. But we are always trying to fit it into a neat, linear narrative of sorts. And many times, there is no way to make sense of things. A very obvious example as an oncologist who is dealing with 30 to 40 cancer patients every week like me and like Seema for the last so many years. On the one hand, we are supposed to not get deeply emotionally involved with our patients, because that could cloud your judgment if your feelings became involved. On the other hand, constantly there are demands of you have to show empathy to the patient, empathy for the patient. So how do you show empathy without getting involved? These kinds of issues are extremely complex. They can be very disorienting. The same way, when we are dealing with actual patients, for example, one of the cases that I talk about here is the story of a young man, Andrew. He develops weakness and tingling in the arm, and the next thing you know, he's quadriplegic. And doctors can only remove 90% of the tumor from his brain. Andrew was 22 years old. He was my daughter's best friend, not her boyfriend. Andrew was a beautiful gay young man. Now, because only 90% of the tumor was removed at surgery, every oncologist knew from that moment on that they can do nothing to add even a day of survival to this poor boy's life. But what did we do to him in the next year and a half until he died? Chemotherapy, surgery, radiation therapy, immune therapy, more chemo, more radiation, more. We kept doing this. Why? Because doctors felt that something might work. We are giving him a chance at least. And his parents, his mother, would say, even if there's 1 in a million chance, I want my son to have it. And do you know the thing that really made me so ashamed of myself is, as this boy is told his diagnosis, he's 22 years old. He turns to his mother and says, "Mom, don't worry, just call Azra. She's on the cutting edge, she'll find a cure for me." So how do I look at myself in the mirror every day? This young man, so trusting at how many levels I as an individual, we as a society are feeling. Who hasn't been touched by cancer? Just like you said about me, I'm sure there are many people who have cancer, have had cancer. Many of us will get cancer. 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women will get cancer. It's not something that's happening to someone else. And so over the years, these questions have been bothering me so much. But the main thing is, for me, it's all about the patient. And I've been feeling more and more that we have become so obsessed with wanting to cure cancer, that cure a disease, that we have forgotten about the illness. Disease is something that doctors treat, but illness is something that patients experience. That's what I wanted to do, is to bring the patient back front and center. And when you do that, the complexity is, I think, best expressed by one of our great poets, Amir Khusro, who lived over 1,000 years ago, or about 1,000 years ago. Khusro darya prem ka, ulti waki dhar. Khusro, this is the river of love. It flows backwards. Khusro darya prem ka, ulti waki dhar. Jo ubhra, so doob gaya. Jo dooba so par. Anyone who tries to rise is sunk. But if you dive deep, that's the only way you will get across. But what Khusro is saying here is very beautifully, has a dual meaning. Khusro darya prem ka ulti waki dhar, jo ubhra so doob gaya, jo dooba so par. If you dive deep, that's your only chance of getting across. But getting across where? You'll either reach the land or you're going to die. That's it. This is the complexity. If we are going to deal with an issue, we have to delve deep into it. There is no superficiality possible when you're dealing with human lives, whether they are 22-year-old or 57-year-old that Harvey, my husband, was, or somebody who is 90 years old. To us, it's the same thing. Today, if I'm diagnosed with cancer, let's say acute myeloid leukemia, the disease I treat, what would I do for myself? I will take all the therapies that are available. Everything I will try to give myself the chance. And so please don't think for a minute that I'm saying we should give up whatever we are doing and cancer is a doom and gloom. No. We have come a long way and we have a long way to go, but right now, whatever is the best treatment, we have to do it, we have to give it. But therein comes the subtitle of the book, the human costs of pursuing cancer to the last. What is the human cost of what we are doing? And this is all we have right now, so we have to do it, but can we envision a different future? This is why I wrote the book, Seema, to try and somehow graphically show people the complexity that a disease like cancer brings, not just for the patient, for the caregiver, for the family, for the society. It's cultural, it's social, it's financial burdens, it's deep emotional challenges. It involves everything. And I'll end my answer to this question by telling you that few weeks after Harvey, my husband died after almost a 5-year-long, extremely painful battle. My daughter Sherzad was 8 years old, and she got the flu. She was very sick for the next few days. And then one morning I was sitting and working in the living room, and she came out sobbing inconsolably. I was sure that she has had a relapse and is feeling worse. When she was able to control herself, she said, "No, Mom, actually I'm feeling much better. But now I know how horrible it feels to be ill and how good it is to get better. And my dad never got better."
That's beautiful. So Azra, if you were in charge, let me put your question back to you. If you had all the resources in the world and you were in charge, controlling the command center, directing the rest of us to do the best we can and do the right thing, what do you think we should do?
That's the kind of question that keeps me up at night for many years. What should we be doing differently? Is there a better answer? Is there a different answer? And not just me, there are hundreds and thousands of researchers like Seema, her husband Jayesh, many oncologists in the room, Dr. Naomi Galili, my right hand, and the person who ran Harvey's lab and my lab for many years, worked in many cities with us. How many conversations have we had together about this? What should we be doing differently? There is no simple answer once again. And so I decided to look at really critically at how have we come to the present time. And if you think about it, in 550 before Christ, Queen Atossa lived, that my colleague Siddhartha Mukherjee cites in his book. 550 BC, Queen Atossa, the daughter of Cyrus the Great, the wife of Darius, finds a bleeding lump in her breast. Any number of physicians from all over the globe would have flocked to her bedside to treat her, yet she was embarrassed, or for whatever reason she kept covering her breast with sheets, and it kept growing until one day she asked her Greek slave to slash it with the sword. And that's the first recorded description of cancer and of its treatment, and she survived. That was 550 BC. Slashing breasts then, slashing breasts today. Chemotherapy, the second strategy that came along. In the Great War, which is the First World War, but we didn't call it the First World War because we didn't know there was going to be a second. So it was called the Great War. Chemical weapons were developed in the Great War, and they were used on humans. And two smart pharmacologists at Yale, Goodman and Gilman, after the Second World War, realized that, many individuals who were exposed to these chemical weapons dropped their blood count. So let's give these poisons to people whose blood counts are high, like in leukemia. That's how chemotherapy started. And the first drugs that were developed from it were cytoxin, chlorambucil, and melphalan. 3 drugs that are the mainstay of chemotherapy for most cancers and transplants today. Melphalan made your career in the beginning until you discovered thalidomide. And it's still being used. This is the story. So, chemotherapy we have been using, and radiation therapy, of course, you all know the story of that. So this is the slash, poison, burn approach we have been using since 550 BC to today. Now clearly today, 68% of cancers that are diagnosed will be cured, but with the same 3 things, mostly, except for rare exceptions. The other 32% who are not cured, their outcome sadly is no different than it was 50 years ago. So my first question when I think deeply about the question of cancer is, despite spending hundreds of billions of dollars in trying to develop new treatments, why are we still using the same old? And what is the best way forward? And it's not a new idea. In 1907, Dr. Childe said that it's not cancer that's incurable, it's the delay in treatment that makes it so. So since 1907, we've been trying to find cancer early. There used to be field armies of women in 1940s and 50s who were sent out to say that, look, we have to diagnose this disease early. And today, the big drop that I talked about, the 68% cure rate and the 26% decline in cancer mortality, meaning death from cancer is coming down by 1% a year for the last 3 decades. So in 30 years, it's down by 27% now. Why is it down? Not because of new treatments, but rather, one, anti-smoking campaigns, and number 2, screening measures for early detection started to get patients diagnosed early. And imagine the same treatments we are using, the chemotherapy and the radiation and surgery, that work in cancer, early stages, doesn't work in late stages. So all this, what is it telling us? The earlier you diagnose the patient, the better, isn't it? So right now, what methods we are using to diagnose early are mammography, colonoscopy, PSA, pap smears, and some biomarkers like CA125, CEA, etc. But most of these were developed long time ago. And they have been refined, and they are some of them are far more accurate now than they were before. And there have been pitfalls with all of these. But the more I thought about it, the more it became clear to me that, okay, if early detection is the best solution, why not go for the first step? Why not use all this amazing latest technologic development in artificial intelligence, in detection of proteomics, genomics, metabolomics, transcriptomics, all these fancy, wonderful molecular techniques that are being developed, using scanning and imaging devices. Why not use all of this to see how far back we can go to detect cancer early? And once we find those markers of early detection, and we find individuals who are at high risk for one cancer versus another, let's say if somebody has a BRCA1 or 2 mutation, then they are susceptible to having breast or ovarian cancer. Those people can be focused on for targeted screening for breast and ovarian cancer. We may discover that certain biomarkers make people at high risk for pancreatic cancer. Smoking makes people high risk for lung cancer. So we can do focus screening. And my dream is that once we find biomarkers of the earliest manifestations of cancer, we should be able to even prevent the development of this monstrosity and really nip it in the bud at that stage. So that's the whole concept of reviewing where we have come historically. We keep doing the same thing with improvements every year and decline in mortality every year, but if we keep going this way, it will take another 1,000 years. And it's very painful. Many of you have received chemotherapy in this room. It's not something to take easily. This is an extremely dreadful procedure. And we should be able to do something better. In 2020, Andrews shouldn't be dying such horrible deaths. This is why I had to delve deep into detail of patient stories and write about their pain and suffering and the anguish of the families. Because the idea is not to revel in pain. The idea is that if we see how painful the thing is for everyone involved, It will liberate us from the past and encourage us to do something different in the future.
Thank you, Azra. That really something to ponder over. And that brings me to the specific question about the first cell or the first cells, and a dilemma that I'm facing in clinic management of myeloma these days, myeloma dilemma. It's about, myeloma is a cancer of plasma cells. I specialize in plasma cell disorders. And as you know, Azra, 3 out of 4 plasma cell disorders are considered to be inactive. They are present, but for some reason they're arrested and not progressing. And the patient is asymptomatic. And they go on to die of natural causes, old age, before this ever transforms. We're not able to predict when it's going to transform. We know it will, but we just don't know if it's going to happen in the patient's lifetime. And only 1 out of 4 are active plasma cell disorders, of which the cancer of multiple myeloma is one. And the management of multiple myeloma, even though it's been terrific in the last 20 years, it's still not a curable disease. The best we do is convert it back to inactive. And so we just shove it back to inactive, shrink it down, and try to keep it there with a little bit of chemotherapy that we call maintenance therapy. The patient is essentially can live 20 years with active disease, but has to be on ongoing treatment. So these days, there is a movement to try and pick out people with inactive plasma cell disorders that are considered to be at high risk of a short transition to active, and then try to treat them. So that means attention is moving to focus on catching it earlier. Not very early, but earlier than what we've been doing. And the dilemma is that we can't cure it anyway. And we don't understand the forces that are keeping the disease inactive. And if we come in, swashbuckling with our chemotherapeutic agents, melphalan included, maybe we're going to disrupt the very forces that are keeping the disease in check. We don't understand the forces. So I'm very troubled about whether to treat or not. And right now the treatment's happening in clinical trials, and patients who've been offered the trials come to me for second opinion, and I'm always not sure if that's the right thing to do because you don't want to do any harm. And in your situation, the myeloid disorders, the chips are similar. These are situations, for the benefit of the audience here, where some abnormal cells that are clonal and maybe may have taken the first step towards cancer, but haven't gone all the way yet. And they've been found in otherwise normal seeming individuals. And the question is, if we wanted to go attack the first cell, maybe that's the time. The patient is asymptomatic, is tough, is able to withstand it, but then we've got 3+7. What are you going to do, give 3+7 to chips? Just wondering, what's the right thing? Do we have to wait for therapy to get better and curable, curative, before we turn to the first cell? Is it sort of a catch-22 that until you can cure it in the last cell, you can't cure it, you can't give it to the first cell? What do you think?
I came to America in 1977, and I came here wanting to be an oncologist, wanting to cure cancer, wanting to study acute leukemia, and I started doing that. But by 1984, it was very clear to me that in my lifetime, acute myeloid leukemia will not be cured because it is such a deadly disease. And sadly, I was right, because in 1977, I was using 2 drugs called 7 and 3, because one is given for 7 days, one for 3 days. And in 2020, I'm still using 7 and 3. So by 1984, when it was clear to me that it's too complicated a disease, I started paying attention to patients giving their history, that many times they gave a history of having low blood counts for months or even years before they developed cancer. which means they had a pre-leukemic phase. So it dawned on me, oh, I should just catch them at the pre-leukemia phase and prevent it, intercept before it becomes leukemia. So my whole life actually has been dedicated just to this proposition, that catch the disease early and intercept. Which reminds me of a story in which two friends are standing and one says to the other, "You smoke?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "Really? How many cigarettes do you smoke a day?" He goes, 20, 30 a day. "Really? For how many years?" He goes, 30 years. "You've been smoking a pack a day or more for 30 years? He goes, "Yeah." He says, "Really? So if you had saved all that money, do you know you could have had a Ferrari today?" And the poor man, the smoker, looked very guilty. He goes, "Yeah, you're right." So he asked his friend, "Do you smoke?" He said, "No." "So where's your Ferrari?" And why did I remember this story? Because where's my Ferrari? I've been talking about the same stuff since 1984. Where's my Ferrari? Where is my answer? So in 1984, I decided, okay, because I was an immigrant from Pakistan, didn't know any better. Had I gone to school in this country, I would have immediately turned my attention to making a mouth model. Thankfully, I was a naive kid from Karachi and trusted my instinct more than tradition and custom, and said to myself, if I'm going to study this disease, I should save samples on the patients, and just started banking bone marrow and blood samples on my patients from 1984 onwards, and have continued to do this. The tissue repository, the bank I have, as Shireen was pointing out, thank you Shireen for bringing that up, is now the largest tissue bank for MDS and AML and the oldest. And what we have is samples of patients as they progress through their disease, serial samples, and just maintaining the tissue repository is about $1 million a year. And no one gives money for this. There are no grants. You know how I support my tissue repository? In these 60,000 samples, not a single cell comes from another oncologist. I do my own bone marrows on patients even to this day. And the way I support it is my patient support. They want to give me money, I say, no, don't give me money, give it for the tissue repository. One of the benefactors is sitting right here, Dr. Shelley Myers. Their family has supported generously the tissue repository. And this is how, through benefactors, through patients, through holding fundraisers, we have maintained the samples. So the Ferrari is not there yet because, first of all, we were collecting the samples. Second of all, every time I've gone in and taken samples out and studied them, ended up with the papers in high-profile journals. But is that what I need? Another paper in Nature or New England Journal of Medicine? No. We were waiting for technology to develop also. So now we have the tissues, we have all the clinical history, all the pathologic, morphologic, a lot of biologic characterization, and the technology has developed now. We have proteomics and genomics and transcriptomics, all these things have developed. So now the two can be matched. And it just took a long time for this to happen. Cited now, one of the reasons for writing this book was that this is my latest assault on the field to do the right thing. And the right thing is, we cannot cure cancer by magic or prayers. We need science to do it, and we need the most advanced, latest, cutting-edge science. That costs money, but we have to put the resources in the right place. We are wasting a lot of resources right now. When you ask me the question, what would I do today? Well, the idea is that a lot of technology has developed. Just on 5th of February, which is last week, this consortium between 750 institutions across 4 continents took 2,600 samples from patients, say 2,600 patients with 38 different types of cancers from 4 continents and performed whole genome sequencing on them, which must have cost billions of dollars. And their conclusion was cancer is complicated. It differs from patient to patient, tumor to tumor, clone to clone within the tumor. And the next step is clinical data has to be combined with the scientific data. My question is, why did we invest billions of dollars to study without clinical data? So the next step is they admit themselves that this has to be done on proper human samples with the clinical data, which means we need to know if somebody has this kind of a characteristic, then they have a short survival. They have this characteristic, they have a long survival. So my answer, as it is in the book described as well, is that we have cancer patients today. We can't ignore that fact. We have to treat them in the best way possible. As I say, if I have cancer, I want all these things done for myself also to a certain extent. And then stop wasting resources and invest those resources into earlier detection using the latest technology. So right now, less than 5% of the government's budget is devoted towards early detection. I'm asking for an increase in that budget. I'm saying that we don't have to do 3,000 clinical trials to test one checkpoint inhibitor or one drug. But this Me Too mentality is what is causing a lot of stagnation in the field, because if one target is identified, a drug is approved for that target, that drug starts making $1 billion a year for the sponsor, then 1,000 other people want to develop a drug for the same target. This is the Me Too mentality, which really squashes creativity, squashes new research and development. So my point is not that we take away money for patients who have cancer today. No, absolutely not. But we stop some of this waste and redirect it. And I think this can happen overnight. Many people ask me also, Seema, that, oh, aren't you going to be attacked by pharmaceutical company and industries because you are saying you want to detect the first cell and they won't be able to make their billions of dollars? And I say no. Right now the pharma industry has only 1.7 million new patients diagnosed with cancer every year. But if we are looking for the first cell, 300 million people who are healthy will become their clients immediately, because everyone will want to do this. And in fact, can you give me my bag, Mariam? I want to show you that this is a chip that has been developed already at Columbia University. I think I have it here. That's my bag. It's a very Karachi bag. But this is what I'm talking about. So for example, this is an MChip. It's called MChip. And this is developed by Professor Sam Sia at Columbia University. He is the head of biomedical engineering. And I'm working very closely with him. This chip is already FDA approved. What is it? You see this part here? You put 1 drop of blood here, and through microfluidics, can you see it? The blood will travel and it will react with whatever antibody has been put here. And this, right now, this chip detects PSA. It's FDA approved for PSA. So men who have cancer, who want to know the activity of cancer, can test their PSA levels by pricking their finger, putting 1 drop of blood here. If they want to do it 10 times a day, it comes with a little device, and very soon you'll be able to do it through your phone. This is the whole idea. So let's say I develop a biomarker that can pick multiple myeloma, earliest biomarkers. By the way, Seema and her husband Jayesh, this couple is a pioneer in introducing new treatment for multiple myeloma using one of the oldest drugs, thalidomide. Seema basically revolutionized the field by showing that thalidomide which was a drug that was very infamous because it produced all those abnormal babies without limbs. But it occurred that if it can stop limbs from growing, maybe it can stop cancers from growing. And indeed it works. And this is one of the great success stories, going from infamy to most famous drug. But the point is, that's a very rare thing. Myeloma is a very rare disease. For all common types of cancers, not much has been done. So we can't keep celebrating and patting ourselves on the back and proclaiming this great victory from the rooftops for few thousand patients when there are millions who are at risk. I'm saying that if we develop, let's say, earliest detection biomarker for pancreatic cancer or for leukemia that I'm working on, we keep adding lanes to this, same chip. And with one drop of blood, you can do all those things simultaneously. And very exciting, as a result of having written the book, somebody who read it and loved the book decided, okay, I'm going to do whole genome sequencing for your entire tissue repository. So that's happening now. And then it's a very happy day for me because I was sitting at lunch with my goddaughter Myoma and her wonderful husband Zaid, and I told Zaid I just got good news at lunch because now somebody else has approached me saying they will look at cell-free DNA for the tissue repository. How exciting is that possibility if that happens? In fact, I told their son, Kian, who I insisted should come with me today, and he's here, because I said, this is so exciting. This is the new era. I'm telling you guys, the next decade coming is going to shift the whole paradigm for cancer. So I'm so excited for the future. I have a very optimistic vision. Because now people are stepping in, we do have the samples, we do have the technology, the resources and the will is coming in, people are beginning to see it. So I feel like we set a new goal, we financially incentivize it, and you'll see how fast everybody is going to turn around and start following that. Because today, the failure rate of experimental drugs in cancer is 95%. So think about it, if companies are willing to invest billions of dollars in an enterprise that has a 95% failure rate, think if we have a higher success rate, and what a great success to diagnose it early and prevent the patient from getting all those horrible treatments. So Seema asked me, well, we are diagnosing some people early, so what are you doing about them? Back to the Ferrari. Idea is that things will co-evolve, meaning once we start diagnosing cancer early, we also have to see how potentially lethal it is. So right now, CHIP that you talked about or MGUS that you talked about, these are early conditions. Only 1 or 2% of the time, in fact CHIP less than 1% of the time will ever become lethal enough to kill a patient. So we don't have to do anything about that. I'm saying not only do you detect the biomarker of the first cell, but you determine its potential lethality at the same time. Is it posing a risk to the patient's life or not? If it is, then everything is worth doing. If it's not, then of course you don't do anything. But we have to do proper science. We have to, there's just no cutting corners. The idea is to change our mindset, take the blinders off our eyes and see the reality for what it is. Stop deluding ourselves that great success has occurred in cancer treatment. No, it hasn't. In fact, today somebody sent me an email saying, Dr. Raza, did you know that your book is quoted in Scientific American on February 10th? And the passage that they have quoted is this: no one is winning the war on cancer. It's mostly hype and mostly the same old self-satisfied voices I've been hearing for the last 50 years. This is what they quoted in the Scientific American.
That's the one I like.
You fragment too. So I'm saying stop fooling the public with this smoke and mirror kind of approach. If you read this big headline that says new cancer cure found, be sure to read the fine print which says in mice.
Wow. So from that, I thought I will switch to the craft. So Azra, with all that you're doing, the repository, the science, social stuff, where did you find the time to write this? Did you write this in longhand? Did you type it out? Did you write it in one long swoop? Or were you disciplined and had a little bit of time each day?
Yeah.
You didn't ask her if she sleeps.
I know she sleeps. I'm not supposed to call her after. I remember that, right? You sleep early. Wake up early, but you sleep early.
Let's put it this way, I don't want to have dealings with humans after 9 o'clock. I read or whatever else I do. But Naomi is right, I don't sleep that as much usually. That's a good question, and in fact you'll be surprised, Seema, that I wrote the whole book in 3 months.
I'm not surprised.
And you know what my nephew Asad said to me? Achi, you've been writing this book for 30 years in your mind. You downloaded it in 3 months.
I can see that.
And that's really true, that I basically have, these are my lived experiences. In fact, the opening sentence of the book is that I couldn't have written this book 30 years ago because I needed to walk the walk. And again, it's all that complexity that keeps haunting me. I mean, I'm an oncologist, and my mentor and my teacher was my late husband, Harvey, who from the beginning said, do not get close to the patients. Now you know how much I listen to him. I got very close to most of my patients. But then he gets diagnosed with cancer, and the first thing he said is turned to me and said, you are going to take care of me. And this is the complexity, that now both of us are oncologists. We know what that enlarging fungal ball means on that X-ray. And how do you convey that anguish? How do you write about it? And this is where fiction helped me a lot. I read a lot of fiction. What example should I? Dalloway. Mrs. Dalloway, a great book by Virginia Woolf, is one of the most profound exploration of love. What it means to love a person. So in this book, Peter Walsh falls in love with Clarissa Dalloway when they're very young. Did he fall in love with her because Clarissa was beautiful? No, because there were thousands of beautiful women in London. Because she was wealthy and beautiful? No. She was wealthy, beautiful, funny and witty? No, there were thousands of women. So what did he fall in love with? So this question of a love that values another person for that person's self. And Woolf is very clear in making sure that she doesn't call it soul or something like that. It's something that matters in another person. And all of our moral intelligence comes from not just recognizing what that is, but also in recognizing the factors that constantly deny and discourage and debase that self and that kind of love. And so, in this, for example, in this book, there's a scene where Peter Walsh is sitting on a park bench and watching traffic go by. And he has just spent 20 years in India and come back to London, and this is 1927. He's spent 20 years in India, he's come back to London, he's sitting and watching the traffic, and suddenly An ambulance comes by, and all the cars pull aside and stop to give way to the ambulance. And he sits there thinking, wow, what a cultured, civilized society. Look at their community spirit, that they are giving way to the ambulance. And he thought to himself, this would never happen in India. The chaos and kind of confusion that exists. But here comes Virginia Woolf's deep subversive attack on the society. Because the very civilization that produced this kind of communal spirit and beautiful parting of cars to let the ambulance go by, that ambulance is carrying the dead body of Septimus Warren Smith, a young man who has committed suicide because he cannot stand the fact that after seeing the mayhem and massacre of wars, he is now expected to come back to London high society and sip tea from dainty cups and make light conversation as if everything is hunky-dory. And so he throws himself out of the window to preserve the thing that mattered, which all of us fritter away in superficialities of life. And so the deep questions that fiction makes you ask. Look at Virginia Woolf's amazing attack on the society itself. On the one hand, they are pulling aside to let the ambulance go. On the other hand, what is the ambulance carrying? The worst indictment of that very civilization and that very society. So we are full of complexities. Dealing with cancer on a daily basis is exactly this. I felt a cleavage in my mind as if my brain was split. I tried to match it seam by seam but could not make them fit. The thought behind I strove to join unto the thought before, but sequence raveled out of reach like balls upon the floor. This is what we have to somehow convey it in the book. These complex issues of writing about humans. What helped me clarify many of these things is that there is no simple narrative, there is no linearity. I shouldn't try to make things and package them into neat little sounding stories, because they are not. They're very complex, they're full of contradictions all the time, and we have to just accept it. And one of the, I think the most important part of the book, and I was very happy to see over lunch that Mariam, my hostess here, in addition to Shireen and Afzal, mentioned that she was affected by the aftermath of the book, because what I've done is told the stories of the patients and then gone back to their families years afterwards to cast a backward glance. And now, with the passage of time, they have had some luxury to make sense out of things and see whether they would have changed any decisions. And you know what? You'll be surprised that basically everyone says no. They had no choice, that this was it. They had to do what they had to do. But the question is, why is that the only choice then? What can we do better in the future at least? And when you are looking back over things, you tend to put order on them. Whereas life is all randomness. There is no order. So in writing this book, I was trying to convey also the fact that it's okay to accept that in the final analysis there are no answers. And that we need to, all we can do is try and diminish the pain and the suffering and the anguish. Arzo sama kahan teri wusat ko pa sake. These planets, this universe, these expanses, they cannot contain your capaciousness. अर्ज़ो समा कहाँ तेरी वुसअत को पा सके, मेरा ही दिल है वो कि जहाँ तू समा सके. Meaning, this universe is too small to accommodate your anguish. It's only my heart that has room for it. And so, what is that thing that matters? What is that heart? How do we convey this in words? And how do we make a society realize where individual responsibility and where society responsibility begins, how we have to do better for the future?
You can see, everyone, that only Azra could have written this book. I try to show the poet, I try to show the philosopher and the scientist, and I think we've gotten a glimpse of that. So Azra, what next? I get the feeling from reading this book that this is just the first step. And you have a lot more to say. So what should we look forward to? Apart from cure for cancer and that chip. So there's a lot of action going on, I can see that. Wonderful progress in the research, that amazing tissue repository. So glad to hear, because I was really upset when I was reading about it, and I sent her a message saying that, I can't believe that you haven't found funding for it, but I think this book might actually produce that for you, I hope. So do you have another project in mind, or are you going to just sit back and reflect a little more? Can we have a little glimpse of what's coming?
काविश का दिल करे है तकाजा कि है हनूज. The heart requires more investment and more work. Kavish is more struggle. The second line is unbelievable. काविश का दिल करे है तकाजा कि है हनूज, नाखून पे कर्ज उस गिरहे नीम बाज का. As long as there is a single half undone knot left in the universe, your work is not done. Your nails owe it a debt to keep trying. And so my work, I feel every day, is just beginning. Yes, I've collected the tissues, but what's the next step? The next step is to get Kians of this world excited and interested. The next steps are to get the future generation who are going to take care of all of us to rise up and say, we are not going to take it like lying down like this, we are going to change things and do it differently. And my job is really now to get the young people to come and study the tissue repository and start working to find. I'm not saying this is the only solution, and I'm not saying it won't come with its own challenges. Seema already hinted on that. So what if we find the first cell right now? We only have those flash poison burn treatments, so we can't give it even if we find it. So we have to co-evolve things. It will come with its own set of challenges and problems, and we need to deal with them. I'm old enough to know nothing is simple, that everything will come in with its own issues. But I think that, as Ghalib says, that every breath that we take has to be, there's only one and only one goal for all of us, which is somehow to reduce human suffering. And in each of us, in our own way, do it. Look at Shireen. Not only is Shireen an amazing physician, but look at the space we are sitting in. What a gorgeous thing that Afzal and Shireen have created for us for all of Chicago. I'm really sad about not living here anymore since I entered this place, because it has a sense of peace and serenity about it. Entering this space brought a certain calmness to me, because I was feeling emotionally quite disturbed since the moment I landed, and I mentioned to my hosts earlier about it, that it's a painful thing for me to come back to Chicago, all the memories that come back, and walking into this gorgeous space that has been created where the accomplishments of man are being celebrated. What could be more beautiful than this space holding poetry recitals, musical functions, the art, the display of all that is so beautiful. I would say that we all owe a vote of thanks to Shireen and Afzal for this, and I'm going to read a Ghalib thing for them. आपकी मदह और मेरा मुंह, आपकी मदह और मेरा मुंह, और करूं भी तो आए किसको यकीन, है दुआ बस यही कि दुनिया में आप हों जिंदा जावेदा आमीन.
Beautiful. Yeah, brings back all those lovely memories. Some of them were really good. So I could sit and chat with Azra all night. Never going to be enough time. But I wondered if anybody has a question. I'll just open it up to the audience. Shireen, let me know how much time we have, and based on that.
I think, we get Azra here after such a long time that most people in the audience probably want to hold on to her as long as they can. But I want to thank both of you for, and Seema, for, you were an excellent locutor. I don't think you had.
When you got a
somebody
subject like
better
Azra.
But really, bringing out the nuances of the book. And I think there must be questions from the audience, and we're going to turn your mics off if you could share this so that we can share a mic with the audience. So I think we'll open it up to questions in the audience. Anybody?
I'm Dr. Sheldon Myers. I've known Azra for probably 25 years. And my first impression of her, my wife was a patient of hers and still is. At Rush, we found out she had MDS and went to see Azra. And it was love at first sight. First question I asked her was, well, what are you going to treat her with? And is it going to be a blind sort of treatment, control cases? And she said, no, I would never do that. Well, that was the love at first sight for my wife and for me, and I think also Azra.
Yes.
And it's been a beautiful 25 years. Now, I think this book is incredible, well written, the science is right on, and it's so well informed. Now, I am a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and I was saying something to Azra at the beginning. The same thing that she is pushing is happening in psychoanalysis, which is that Freud isn't what he used to be. There's more complexity to how the human mind works than his ideas, but his ideas have been supported for like over 100 years, and it's very hard to change people's opinion, but there are newer theories which are more encompassing, which really, in the equivalent, go back to the first cell. So she is a leader besides cancer in how medical technology works and how the culture works. So she's just a fabulous woman. Keeping my wife going these 25 years, who also happens to be in the book, and she is actually fulfilling something that Azra wrote about her in the book, which is she just keeps going. And she's now in Aspen for her son's birthday and having 4 or 5 grandchildren there. So she unfortunately had to miss coming here because of that. And we see Azra all the time when we go to New York to get professional treatment, as well as a wonderful friendship.
Thank you, Shelley. She is being well represented by you. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question. Last March 8th, my best friend, 47 years old, was diagnosed with lung cancer, which had already spread to her brain, liver, and bones when it was found. And by November 8th, she was dead. This is in London. And those 8 months were some of the most excruciating, horrific months of treatment that she went through on the NHS. And my question, coming from the US and going to London to see her, was, what are the ethics of treatment when you know that survival is almost impossible? She was 47, non-smoker, young kids. And so those things I can understand informed a lot of her treatment options, but it felt like the NHS being free kind of became this, let's throw everything at her and see what sticks. Her end was horrific. The quality of life was, you can imagine, you're all doctors, you can imagine. There was nobody there to kind of say, as a patient advocate, or even as the oncologist, no one to say, we're done here. There's nothing more to be done. And up to a week before she died, she was being given chemo. I've grown up with cancer in my family from a very young age, so I understand some of it. I'm not a doctor. But it just seemed like they put her through hell only for her to die in the end, which was going to happen anyway. So what are the ethics of who decides that you're done? And why is it so difficult for doctors to say that to patients?
Well, first let me offer my condolences and sympathies for you, because this is truly an unspeakable tragedy for a young mother of children, non-smoker, to get cancer. It just goes to show no one is immune from this disease. This is why my contention is that every healthy individual from birth to death should be screened for cancer, basically, because no age is exempt. Andrew was 22 and gets cancer, which brings me to show you my second chip, actually, which is this little one. We are also at the biomedical engineers at Columbia University. I'm working with them on this. We are trying to develop an implantable chip now, which can be placed under the skin for constant surveillance for the appearance of cancer cells or cancer biomarkers. Your question is a deeply disturbing one to me personally also, because we deal with this issue all the time. So first of all, let me say that I have full faith and confidence in NHS, that they were not trying to overtreat her because drugs are free. No, actually, it's financial issues don't come into these things at individual levels. Maybe at policy levels they come into question, but never at individual levels, at least in these societies. So she got all the treatments. Second is that the patient is always told that these are your chances, and they do make an informed decision always. They actually have to sign consent forms giving their decision. So it wasn't like she was tricked into doing anything, so at least you can put your mind at rest for those few issues. It was not a financial issue, it was not that she was not informed. The problem is, if we didn't do those things, her end would be even worse, because cancer is an extremely painful disease. And I have a description from the early 1900s in the book. Stephen Hall has written a fabulous book, Commotion in the Blood, 20 years ago, I think, which describes how patients were dying earlier in the last century. It is terribly painful. So the question is, basically your friend is being given a choice: you die of the cancer or you die of the treatment. And I'm asking, why are these the only two choices? And if they are the only two choices today, how do we do better tomorrow? Today they are the only two choices. If I was in your friend's place, I would have probably taken all the treatments also. There is no one to tell you except the patient themselves decide. But how does a 47-year-old, the mother of little kids, decide? This is it. Many of you must have read When Breath Becomes Air. He could not decide to stop also. In fact, after his diagnosis of incurable cancer, he goes and has a child. Because that is the complexity we are trying to talk about. That's one of the most beautiful books written. And I don't think anyone can be unmoved by that story. This is what we deal with on a daily basis, but no one is fooling anyone else. The only problem is we don't have good solutions. So how do we find good solutions? If the only solution that seems to have worked until now is find the cancer in its earliest stage and try to treat it then that's all I'm saying, that let's try to do it as early as possible. Yes, sorry, Shiri.
Thank you very much for coming and speaking to us about a subject that certainly I know most of the people in this room, and cancer has touched our lives personally and professionally, and you're incredibly eloquent, and so personally, thank you. My question goes to, in some part in your response that you just gave, finding solutions. I've been involved with both Imbruvica and Venclexta, both of them in the leukemia space, more from, I worked at AbbVie. And again, you talked earlier about identifying one checkpoint and everybody attacking just that one checkpoint. And then you also spoke about the policy concerns around the multiple clinical trials that have to happen on just that one spot, and how long it takes to get one of these drugs to market. I think there is room, both for physicians and for lay people, to come and educate the broader public for how to affect policy change. How do we get fewer clinical trials, because that may well end up producing more drugs and more results that go onto the market. How do we go about doing that, and can you speak a little bit more towards those policy concerns?
I think that you have hit the nail on the head. That the best way to bring about change is through public opinion. How do we change public opinion? Through education, awareness. How do we do that? Every medium possible. This space we are sitting in is a way of doing it. Look what Shireen and Afzal have made possible this afternoon. This is the kind of thing that can have a snowballing effect. That people start discussing, why aren't we doing that? Why are we? So I think you're absolutely right that things have to change at the policy issue, and to bring about that change, pressure has to come from advocacy groups, from the public, from the patients. It's come to the point right now that the pressure on the FDA to approve drugs for cancer is so high that they've lowered their bar of approval to 2.15 months of improvement in survival. A drug is approved and somebody is going to make billions of dollars off of that drug. And 42% of cancer patients in this country today, 42% become completely financially ruined after 2 years of diagnosis. They lose every penny of their life savings in such a way that their next generation is ruined. 42%, it's unconscionable. It is an embarrassment and it is unsupportable. So the public has to realize this also, that just for gaining weeks of improvement in survival and at the cost of immense physical suffering and financial ruin, why are we doing this? How can we do better? Education, awareness, and setting new goals. Scientists have that responsibility. Set a new goal, show a new path, because the one thing I've learned is I keep reading and rereading a book every few years. It's called The Structure of Scientific Revolution by Thomas Kuhn. And basically, his premise is, if you want the paradigm to shift, show a better way. Nobody is willingly going to give up anything they're doing. You want them to do something different, show them a better way. So if we find earlier detection by, let's say, a smart bra that women have to wear just for 1 hour a week, and this will scan their breasts for the presence of the first cell, instead of having painful mammograms once a year, which is going to miss a lot of cancers, so that 40% women are being diagnosed with advanced cancers. If that smart bra is approved tomorrow, do you think any woman will go and have a painful mammogram? Sounds like a kind of telegraph, mammogram. No, nobody will go there. They'll all be wearing smart bras for an hour a week. So where is the better way? That's what we have to do. So basically, the leaders in the scientific field have to think differently also. There are many oncologists in the room. I would love for them to speak up. I won't take names, but okay, there's a surgeon. But we'll let her speak.
So I was going to make that confession to start with. So I'm not really an oncologist. But I do talk to women with newly diagnosed cancer. Breast cancer is what I deal with. And I spend a lot of my professional academic time in cancer prevention. So, I think that you're a wonderful advocate for cancer prevention and its importance. But I also deal with the realities of women who are offered prevention, who are diagnosed, who are identified, I shouldn't say diagnosed because they don't have a disease, but they're identified as being at increased risk. And there are options that are available that are at least partially successful in preventing breast cancer. And many women decline the treatment, the preventive treatment, because they don't want to deal with the side effects of therapy. So unfortunately, at the moment, there isn't any free lunch. You paint a vision of a free lunch. Hopefully that's true. But I think as we develop these ideas for both early detection and prevention, one has to consider also the costs that are applied in the case of prevention, not just to people who will develop cancer, but also to many others. So, just like the fishermen at sea, you use you cast a wide net and you catch a lot of what you didn't intend to catch. So as you say, it's complicated, and those are some of the complexities that will really need to be addressed as we move forward in the area of prevention.
Thank you, Seema. I couldn't agree more. Dr. Seema Khan is legendary breast cancer surgeon, and her claim to fame is that we went to medical school together, and somehow we looked so much alike. I would treat the patients and they would give the presents to her. She has been the recipient of many of my gifts.
I'm still receiving gifts.
But I think you are absolutely right that there is a lot of concern about taking therapy today because they're draconian measures. But when we co-evolve better techniques, I think things hopefully will change for the future. But as I say, I'm not here to sit and claim that everything is going to be hunky-dory and an easy ride. I keep saying there will be new challenges, there will be new problems that will come with new technology. Yes, of course. But my point is, if we kept tinkering with the typewriter, we would never have the word processor. Sometimes you have to go for entirely different things, and if one strategy has been milked dry for the last 75 years, then maybe we should be looking at something different. Instead of constantly chasing after the last cell, let's go try and do something different and diagnose the first cell.
Hello, Azra.
Question over here.
First of all, Assalamu alaikum. And we miss you so much. I remember all the wonderful literary meetings that you placed at Lakeshore. So in any case, first of all, let me express my pride in seeing you doing what you're doing.
Thank
It's such a wonderful thing, of course, for humanity. I'm not a man of medicine. My son is. But in any case, since the talk, I shouldn't say depressing, but definitely on the other side, could you please regale us with some of your poetry, Khalid or anybody else?
Shireen has promised, thank you so much for that beautiful compliment. I have many friends here who won't be able to understand Urdu, so I'll read, I can't say no to you, so I'll read something in English if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because can't say equally obsessed, but poetry is poetry, so I'm obsessed with poetry. And some of the poetry in English is just absolutely gorgeous. So,
And maybe some Urdu too.
Shireen has promised to invite me back for some
The
Urdu
whole
sessions.
evening, yes.
That would be good. I had no time to hate because the grave would hinder me. And life was not so ample, I could finish enmity. I had no time to hate because the grave would hinder me, and life was not so ample, I could finish enmity. Nor had I time to love, but since some industry must be, this little toil of love I thought was large enough for me.
So,
Please
hello,
introduce
it's
yourself.
Jayesh Mehta. I'm at Northwestern, and my claim to fame is being Seema's husband. Some of the problems you describe in the book are because of the way the specialty of oncology works at the moment, and you've fundamentally challenged that. How has the establishment viewed your work so far?
Good question. I learned a very important lesson that Harvey gave me, which is that you never fight on grounds of anyone else's choosing. You choose your own grounds to fight. And one of the first things I decided to do is choose my ground by initiating my assault from Columbia University. So I gave grand rounds where all the oncologists and the high and mighty of cancer research were present. And I minced no words in my uncompromising presentation, at the end of which Ed Gelman got up, who was the previous division director, and said, Azra, before the young people in the room slit their wrists, can you please tell us how they should be behaving until we find a cure for cancer? Because I painted the picture of such staggering failures in cancer treatment. So actually I answer that question in the book by quoting a sher. Because the rule of medicine is first do no harm. And young people need to remember that constantly. One thing that never fails for young people is showing up and being present. One of the issues is that if we can't cure a patient, that's when our real job begins. Because that's when we need to start that inner journey with the patient to make their last days as happy as possible. and to decrease their anxiety and fear, and to be there for them, to guide them when it's needed, to be their friends when it is needed. And after I was done, I have to say that the current director, Gary Schwartz, got up and said, Azra, you used to be our scientific leader, now you're our spiritual leader also. So you see, I started by attacking in the lion's den, and it's amazing that all of Columbia University, from leadership on down, are all behind me. Not only that, I'm surprised at how few the negative reactions have been to the book, because basically all of us who are treating cancer are frustrated at some level or another at the lack of progress. For every success story, there are 9 out of 10 which are terrible disasters, but we tend to remember the happy anecdote also. And we blame our patients for only listening to the positive sides and saying 20% will respond, and they think they're the 20% and not the 80% who will be terrible failures. But we as oncologists suffer from the same kind of positive thinking. We keep offering things when we know it has a little chance. So, at a certain level, everyone identifies with some part or the other, because that's our experience. And I think that I speak for a lot of young oncologists, because we expect them to listen to the patient, to spend time with them, and yet the onus of scut work that we have heaped upon them is so horrifying that all they can think of is sleep. They have to spend 80% of their time putting things into computers instead of seeing patients. So before we start criticizing younger people for not spending enough time with patients and not showing them empathy and not doing this and that, have we asked ourselves, did we provide the opportunities for the young people to become the best versions of themselves or not? And if we are not doing that, then we are failing as a society. These are the kinds of issues that really bother me. And thankfully, I'm old enough to be fearless about voicing them at this stage. And when I speak up, it's surprising how many people identify with it and actually support me for what I'm saying instead of criticizing. Instead of having a negative reaction, they admit that there is truth to what I'm saying. So I don't really think it has been, I mean, there's always the naysayer, but they'll always be there, and maybe I'm wrong, I admit it, but at least I'm addressing the complexity. I'm not deluding myself into thinking everything is hunky-dory and keep doing the same old, same old. That's the idea. What do you say to this?
I agree. I think it's no. I think it takes guts to speak up, and I think most of us are very pleased that you've started this conversation, and certainly going to force some change, some reflection. So. I would agree with you that as you know, Jayesh and I mean, you know, we're happy that you're talking about it, and I'm glad that you're getting so much support from Columbia. So I think you know, I can see the ripples spreading out from there. And you told me you just came back from a meeting in Seattle, and so spread the word and provoke some reflection and thinking, and continue on. I think. It's fantastic. So glad that you've done this. You know, it does take a lot of courage, about 3 months worth of work, but a whole lifetime of experiences. So can't tell you how grateful I am for having done this.
Everybody, please notice that I asked Seema to intervene, because I think in a couple's case, the wife should have the last word. We can't let Jayesh get away with this. But I don't want my male colleagues to be upset with me, because here's a good joke for all of you. These two guys are sitting at work, and one was looking very depressed. So his friend said, "What's wrong? Why do you look depressed?" He goes, "Well, what would you do if your best friend runs away with your wife?" The other guy goes, "Forget it. You can't find such good friends these days."
Well, thank you so much, Azra and Seema, and Azra for being brave enough to write this book. It's a must-read. And for those of you who don't have it already, we have several copies in the back there. And I think we have a few minutes with Azra, and she'll probably even sign it for you. To save time and make it easier to sign, we've left some pieces of paper so you can write your names on it, so she spells them right when she signs the book for you. I want to thank all of you for making it out here this evening, and hope we'll see you again at some of the events that Afzal mentioned. And we'll definitely have to get Azra back for a mehfil, right?
Thank
That's
you.
the only thing we can call those sessions, they were mehfils.
Thank you, Shireen. I would like to thank, of course, Shireen and Afzal for arranging this incredible moment for me. Also would like to thank Seema, who has been an amazing interlocutor. Like you said, your questions were not, I have to admit to you that most of my interviews have been from interlocutors who are combative and argumentative and who are constantly getting into the detail of some scientific technique and things. But you were an incredibly emotionally involved interlocutor who brought out things from me that no one else has managed to bring out. And I hope that we will continue this kind of partnership. And to Shireen and Afzal, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I end with, again, a short Emily Dickinson. A word is dead when it is said, some say. A word is dead when it is said, some say. I say, it just begins to live that day.
Beautiful.
Let the first